Kia ora tātou katoa, i ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā iwi katoa, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm writing a biography about Henry Williams, karuwha, and I'm going to talk about him today as missionary, as peacemaker, and as treaty translator. In her 1968, The Legacy of Guilt, Judith Binney presented the choice facing early CMS missionary Thomas Kendall as either living apart from Māori, just make sure I've got my slides up, and launched. Aroha mai. Presented the choice facing early CMS missionary Thomas Kendall as either living apart from Māori or becoming involved in the way of life that he came to destroy. Kendall chose the latter, and this, in Binney's view, ended up destroying Kendall. But this stark choice, this binary between choosing separateness from Māori culture, to use our post-19th century language, and choosing engagement with it, is, I say, a reductionist and distorting picture of how the bulk of missionaries operated, in fact, had to operate. The mission stations themselves, as we've already heard today, under Williams at Paihia, Clark and others at Waimate, became shared Māori and Pākehā spaces. And furthermore, the missionaries were always itinerating around the villages and settlements, in Henry's case, Kororareka, Kawakawa, and many other places. Concerning the allegations of cultural imperialism or the cultural destruction thesis tilted at missionaries in this 1960s to 80s historiography and since, Professor Ballantyne, I'm relying on him, has, in part, has entered a firm rejoinder pointing, as I am, to the extent to which missionaries were required to work with Māori, to immerse themselves in the logics of Māori language and culture, and to make substantial accommodations to Māori practices and beliefs. In summary, cultural or social change in the direction of Christianity in the Bay of Islands in the 1820s to 30s was the outcome of translation, conversation, and debate. Questions surrounding the interactions of missionary Christianity and the indigenous culture feeds into the older debate on Māori conversion, what it was and why it happened. James Belich suggested in his Path-Breaking Making Peoples of the mid-1990s that Christian belief ran deeper than the mere pursuit of new cultural knowledge. He argued instead that conversion was better defined as the Māori incorporation of Christianity, and at the end the Musket Wars and the release of Christianised slaves made Christianity, rather than Christianity making peace. So this was to invert the typical older emphasis on what European missionaries did, placing the agency back in the Māori world, which was a constructive advance on much older literature. Now there is much that rings true in this analysis, but in other respects it downplays European agency too much in the effect to play up Māori agency. Both were at work. And in any event, missionaries realised this at the time, as this quote from William Williams in the 1860s suggests. We need to look first at what Williams and colleagues did and why it was eventually so influential. One reason it was so, I suggest, is because of the way that the new sacred rhythms of the rā tapū, the Sabbath, and the new forms of dispute resolution for hara, or wrongs, cut across or disrupted the customary Māori patterns of utu and taua mudu, a very contested space. Another is the way that biblical translations employed important Māori words, including tapu for the Sabbath, mudu for God's forgiveness of sin. So the influence was both at the level of ideas and it was material, underlined by daily and weekly practice. In the accounts of Henry Williams' Paihia mission, we see various forms of resisting tapu, accommodating or observing tapu, relating despite tapū norms, and the conversion or reapplication of tapū itself. Now, Henry Williams' relationship, this is in some ways going into territory where angels fear to tread, but I'm going to go there because that's where these guys went. Henry Williams' relationship with the important local tohunga, priest or seer, tohi tapū, reveals many of these dynamics, including that of spiritual power encounter. Such overtly metaphysical confrontations occurred in early medieval Anglo-Saxon conversion narratives and seem evident in the diaries, for example, of David Brainerd among the New Jersey Indian tribes. And there are other New Zealand examples other than the one I'm about to tell. So in January 1824, Henry Williams' standoff with tohi tapū seems to me to be such an early defining confrontation between different spiritual beliefs. It's not totally clear what backgrounded this affray. Now, the scene is that Henry is around 32, pretty young, not quite as young as Justice Williams was in Muri Whenua. He's been in the country barely 6 months, and he confronts this tohunga who's more than twice his age, possibly around 70, a very influential man, a great man. So how's this relationship going to unfold? So on this occasion, and I'm not getting into the sort of messiness of this thing, but he leapt the fence, tohi tapū did. He demanded some utu. He uttered curses or makutu throughout the night and morning. At some point, Mary Ann Williams sent him out a pot of tea, which he drank. And interesting that there's a lot of other big chiefs, or there's quite a few big chiefs that are also sitting around observing what's going on. Henry stood firm, he resisted demands for utu, and he did not die, which some people expected. Angela Middleton gives a permissible interpretation of the results of this affray. In effect, by withstanding this traditional challenge, Henry Williams demonstrated his mana and power and was thus accepted as another chief among the rangatira at Paihia. Tohi tapū soon became a friend of the mission, and you can see this in a number of ways. In 1829, Henry and William Paki travelled with him to the hāhunga ceremony, travelled with tohi tapū to the hāhunga ceremony for hongi hika. And a rangatira there stated that tohi tapū had become a missionary and now left off his former ways, as the tohunga did not intend to take lives as utu for the death of his relative hongi. Was this a type of conversion? Well, not completely, as the missionaries would have hoped for, but this was some sort of significant change in tapū mores. Henry Williams and the Paihia mission actively resisted visits by Tauamuri seeking compensation for breaches of tapū, or apparent breaches of tapū. Some of them certainly were real, or insults to chiefly mana. After a particularly serious early encounter leading to physical affray, an agreement was secured with the Waitangi chiefs and mission patron Te Koki that the mission would be free from the law of utu and would not be visited by tau and stripped or plundered of goods in the customary fashion. Nevertheless, the mission, and which included many Māori over time, did have to resist other visits by Tauamuru through the years. However, to focus on narratives where the laws of tapū were resisted would give a false impression. In many cases, they were simply observed, and others reinterpreted through Christian lenses, as when Honi Heke stopped a group of women carrying baskets of food through the mission on the rā tapū. Henry Williams' journals reveal another type of conversion going on, more subtle, and I say a type of reverse conversion, not so much in fundamental beliefs, but in a reverse accommodation of Māori tikanga. And this was partly necessary to be effective as a missionary, to be open to different ways of doing things, while disagreeing, obviously, with some aspects. It was Williams' relationship with tohi tapu that seems evident when Williams attended his hahunga at Whāngai near Kawakawa in January 1834. The missionaries were provided with considerable hospitality, and Williams could describe the scene in quite neutral phrases. The bones of our friend tohi tapu were laid in great state, besides 20 heads of his relatives. About 30 baskets of potatoes were turned over for us, as in provided. Even though Māori funerary practices were quite different to Christian burial, Williams and the mission recognised their importance to Māori. When tohi tapu had died some 6 months earlier, Williams described the struggle over his body between the people of Waitangi and those of Whāngai, where he was eventually buried. There was some opinion, in fact, that he should actually be buried at the Paihia mission, as he'd resided so long in that vicinity, essentially alongside the Paihia mission. But Williams and the mission resisted the proposal, fearing that it would embroil them in perpetual debates over tapu. However, Williams did take tohi tapu's slaves into the care of the Paihia mission to preserve them from violence and the customary killing of a slave. On the death of a person of status, such as tohi tapu was. So can an evangelical missionary have a real friendship with a tohunga Māori? Jane Sampson writes that Pacific peoples were not just converts, they were also teachers, friends, family members, and clergy. The narratives of encounter between Williams and rangatira such as tohi tapu, and in some ways tohi tapu is one of the hardest relationships that Williams had with chiefs. He had a lot that were easier, indicate how close relationships could grow across cultural divides. Each had to flex to accommodate and understand the other. Williams referred feelingly to poor tohi tapu in the latter's final days of sickness. His prominence in Williams' accounts back to family in England even led to Reverend Edward Marsh sending a scarlet robe, quote unquote, for the tohunga in his last days. So while Māori saw people as such as Williams as increasingly part of their world, Māori became increasingly part of Williams' world. Judith Binney, in her study of Kendall, acknowledged that the ability to develop friendships with Māori was a measure of cross-cultural competency, as perhaps we'd like to express it. I think if you apply this criteria to Henry Williams, he appears as an outstanding example of the capacity to engage humanly and humanely across this cultural and philosophical divide. Philosophical change was occurring, and cultural change along with it. There was a deep and powerful spirituality evident in the Christian religion, and Māori embraced this in various ways. Scriptural translation was significant in the way it adopted and remapped existing concepts of atua, tapū, and karakia. Judith Binney wrote about the destruction of the Māori tapū system, but in a sense, this concept was redirected and found new forms and new expressions. And other tapu things were entering the Māori metaverse, or its 19th century equivalent. An increase in baptisms and congregants was accompanied, or perhaps preceded, by a great increase in demand for books and in numbers at schools. The desire for books, scriptures and prayer books, was so great, recorded William Williams, of the late 1830s, that it was impossible for some time to meet the demand. The statistics for baptisms, print religion, mission schools and worshipping communities by the early 1850s indicate that, however it may be measured, a general conversion of Māori to Christian belief and practice was widespread. And we don't need to agree on a set proportion of the population. I acknowledge the recent work of Malcolm Falloon in this area. Somewhere in the range of 60 to 90% of the population to note this numerous evidence of Christian practice. including the church rush, as James Belich coined it, in Making Peoples. So these were whare karakia built by Māori, mostly within existing kāinga, and employed central pō, native decorations on the ceilings and walls, and in some notable cases, including manutuke, carvings on the central pillars and wall panels. So when we focus on what Māori were doing, rather than the European missionaries, we start to see the pattern of Christian adoption and adaptation more clearly. But there are areas where, as I'm tracking in this biography, the influence of Henry Williams and colleagues was undeniable and critical. Besides that of translating and printing the scriptures and, in a sense, reconfiguring tapū through new Christian practice, another was peacemaking. So karuwhare as peacemaker. To paraphrase James Belich's argument, did peace really make Christianity, or did Christianity make peace? In other words, although Belich did not discount the influence of Christianity, he emphasised that material conditions of equal armaments, that is, once tribes had tooled up and got muskets, then the keenness to engage in warfare diminished, and tribes made peace partly when they released these Christianised slaves. This materialist explanation is, I think, though, inconsistent with other scholars, including Balara, Kerry Howell, in the 1970s, who highlight that Māori were quite prepared to keep fighting for their own reasons of tikanga in this period. So how important were the missionaries for 1830s peacemaking, is the question that I'm asking here. The older historiography, or hagiography, portrayed the English missionaries as the great peacemakers, without whom the country would have remained in the darkness of war and death. In Garlick's 1939 text, sort of short biography of Williams, Peacemaker of the Tribes, published by CMS UK, Henry Williams is announced as the herald of peace and as peacemaker to the last. While Lord Bledisloh's foreword glossed his influence this way: no one has more profoundly affected the character and lofty traditions of New Zealand's people, or the relatively happy and trustful relations of the two races which constitute it. Recent historiography, such as Balara's Taua, tends to suggest that Māori would have made peace eventually, according to tikanga and by customarily appointed peacemakers, as they continue to do so through the 1830s and 40s, and probably many instances without the direct support of the missions. Balara is correct, I think, to say that Māori continued to make war for customary reasons of utu, rebalancing, recompense. But did Māori make peace through the 1830s to 40s and beyond for quite the same reasons? What role did the missionaries play in this? It is necessary to strip back the high-level rationale to reveal the nuances of peacemaking in key instances. And I'm going to focus a little bit on Tāmaki, Auckland, in December and January 1836, as a leading instance, when Williams conducted peacemaking over several weeks, the ground for which had been prepared by his visitations to Tāmaki, Hauraki and Waikato over the preceding years. So this Tāmaki peacemaking was only possible, due to the relationships that Williams had forged with Ngāpuhi rangatira over almost a decade, commencing with his key peacemaking role in the 1828 war between Hokianga and Bay of Islands, in the 1830 Girls' War across the harbour here, cases where leading Māori tohunga and peacemakers implored karuwhare to intervene. I don't have time to do a full narrative of this, but this map, which is small, depicts essentially where he went. So in brief, he departed Paihia in the middle of December 1835. He began peace negotiations on 24 December near Thames, and these carried through until final resolution on 16 January at Ōtāhuhu. Essentially non-stop hui for 3 weeks. And you have to read the biography to get the detail. This peacemaking critically involved Te Whirowhiro and Ki Waikato leaders on one side, Ngāti Pāwa are prominent among hauraki groups on the other side, and Ngāpui peacemakers sort of somewhere in the middle, and Williams in the middle. It was this round of peacemaking and other side peacemaking agreements that basically brought peace to Tāmaki and Hauraki before the onset of British settlement and government in the early 1840s. So the pivot point, the fulcrum of a real lasting peace, may have been in late 1833, the selection of the Puriri or Thames site and the choice of Te Waharoa to commission Williams with his hatchet, probably Mere Pounamu, to convey to Ngāpui, rangatira. From about this time, leading Ngāpui peacemakers, Rewa and Te Wharerahi and others become allied with Williams in seeking to bring about a peace with their enemies in this whole southern region, really. And in fact, in July 1833, same month that Tohi Tapu died, actually, Rewa and Wharerahi had themselves proposed to Williams that he establish this mission station in the Thames area. Given the threat that Ngāpui still posed to their southern iwi, including fears that the northerners would take possession of Tāmaki, this involvement of Ngāpui was probably critical to resolve these other internal conflicts in the region. And from this juncture too, so late 1833, mission stations very quickly were planted throughout this Hauraki Waikato Tāmaki area. If Karuwha had not been facilitating discussions, acting as go-between, delivering Te Tau Pounamu in this 1833 to 36 period, it is probable that the Auckland Waikato Bay of Plenty region would have remained more volatile, or would have remained volatile. He was involved in many of the key discussions during this period, advocated for peace in fair weather and foul. Some of that was unsuccessful. His trips to the southern area occupied 1/10 of his entire time in the 1830s, so he was away from home a lot. Testimony of certain Māori leaders underlines the point that missionary involvement made a substantial difference to peace. After meeting Te Whirowhiro and securing peace overtures towards the Thames in 1835, Williams recorded, "They tell us it is a good work in which we are engaged, but that we should have been amongst them years ago, then would thousands have been spared to them who have been cut off by the relentless hand of war." A perspective that is given added weight by conservative estimates of the Muscat War period at 20,000 deaths and those enslaved and displaced at perhaps 30,000. So the memorial raised by the Māori clergyman to Williams in 1876, which you can visit along at St. Paul's, reads in Māori and English, to sort of paraphrase the Māori, "He was a father indeed to all the tribes, a courageous man who made peace in the Māori wars. For 44 years he sowed the good news in this island." So this proclaims his greatest legacy as the gospel of peace, peace with God and peace with enemies. Now the language is obviously somewhat exalted and romanticised, but I think that closer analysis, and I've just given you a little snapshot today, shows there are real foundations to that. Part 3. I wish to make this point. Henry Williams was a missionary first and foremost, a peacemaker, tribal mediator second, and a treaty interpreter a distant third. However, his role as this intertribal mediator actually had much to do with the purpose of the treaty itself, creating a new basis for civil order in a context of Māori and Pākehā entanglements, including trade and intimate relationships, which in some cases had provoked inter-tribal strife. So this is how Williams had, in a sense, acted in this ever-evolving context of the 1820s and 30s. And now in the treaty, in a sense, he pointed to Queen Victoria's kāwanatanga, who, or which, would now attempt to do the same, with this major distinction that the kāwanatanga carried the Crown's authority and also the accoutrements of military and naval power, so quite a major distinction. Nevertheless, some chiefs in the north understood this connection between the old mediators, including Williams, and this proposed new mediator. The debates at Waitangi were partly divided on the issue of whether chiefs should continue to look to Williams and Busby and co, or needed to look to this new kāwana to help resolve disputes, including but not limited to disputes with Europeans. Rather than the paradigm of sovereignty, which has framed the treaty interpretation literature since Ruth Ross, it was these issues of law and order, the protection of Māori rights, along with control of British settlement, that were paramount. So I say the better interpretive paradigm for Te Tiriti is civil government, not sovereignty. The very structure of the treaty in both texts proclaims this purpose, accentuates it in Te Tiriti, in fact, by calling the articles ture. So what were ture? They weren't customary Māori things. Ture was a European import via Tahitian biblical translations of Torah, the Jewish or Old Testament books. Henry Williams brought together the two of the key paradigms of Te Tiriti, of law, of ture, and of civil government, in recollecting how he explained the treaty to Māori as bringing the tribes together with the British under one law, human and divine. What does this discourse draw from? I suggest it draws from a number of sources, but even if distantly, the ancient Greco-Roman idea of the polis or civitas, the early medieval, early modern European idea of the res publica, republic or commonwealth. That is a sphere of authority and participation in authority that was public, common, or for the benefit of all, in a defined community of citizens. Now, is this godly city that, of course, St. Augustine takes up that theme, the city of God? We've heard about the city of God earlier today. These sort of cities on a hill. Williams was a nonconformist. The statement about laws, human and divine, I think recalls these other sort of nonconformist Puritan projects, Calvin's City of Geneva. It's this godly city that I think the missionaries were aiming at in their mission stations, observing sacred routines of worship, rest and work, attempting to resolve disputes or offences by negotiation, adjudication and compensation, or a modified form of utu. So there was an embryonic new law here, or ture, that did not rely on any state or empire-sanctioned authority. It relied instead on a form of consent, voluntary assent to a new mode of living and resolving wrongs. What's my time? Okay, so I'm going to jump forward a century. Yeah, that was a clumsy segue, wasn't it? To the 1930s. But in fact, this is a very significant segue. So on 12 August 1939, Isla Mabel Reid, née Williams, a granddaughter of Henry Williams, penned a telegram to Lord Bledisloe in the UK asking him if he would write a foreword to a revised edition of A Life of Henry Williams. Carleton's 1870s biography was apparently being rewritten at the time by a leading New Zealand historian, but was never published by the Williams family because this historian took a less than positive view of the land dispute with Grey that we've heard about or alluded to earlier. This was an issue that still loomed very large in Williams family consciousness. Criticism of missionaries, their lands and so on. Alga Williams, who's responsible for the large collection of Williams papers at Auckland Museum, was picking up on this. So Alga was the sister of Isla. It was quite a large family. They were all grandchildren of Henry Williams. If land was a source of wrongs, it was also a nexus of relationships between Māori and the mission. It remained an ongoing site of memory where Henry Williams' sons and grandchildren continued to recall the arrangements and relationships of years past. In 1890 to 91, 3 of Henry's sons, who were still resident in the Bay of Islands area, supported Ngāti Rahiri claims in the Native Land Court to secure title to this Te block that's pictured, where the marae stands today. Anyway, that's a whole story. Another 50 years on the cusp of the treaty centennial, a whare runanga was being constructed at Waitangi on the land formerly known as the Busby residence. Isla Mabel was married to Vernon Reid, MP. He was actually very instrumental in Lord Bledisloe making this gift back to the nation. Rowed Lord and Lady Bledisloe across the Waitangi River on a yellow painted skiff of doubtful seaworthiness, as Vernon later recalled. So they had much to do with the reason why the treaty grounds exist today. If we dig into this Bledisloe gift, we find that Henry Williams' descendants, those still residing in the Bay, were a key part of the story. And that revolved around land as a site of memory. Isla Reid, I'll just finish on this. When she was forwarding a copy of telegrams to Brother Alga, remarked in significant but hurried but significant scrawled words, the Māori house, so this is 1939, the Māori house is getting on well at Waitangi. There are some 35 carvings, but as women aren't allowed inside, I haven't seen them all yet. And I think this is just a little glimpse into the relationships that existed on the ground some 100 years after the fact. So Isla's reporting on the progress of this whareruinga at Waitangi because it was important to her, as a Williams descendant in particular. Her very knowledge of its construction and its carvings indicates that she was connected to the Māori communities conducting the carving. And furthermore, she revealed her understanding of ongoing tikanga of tapū and the exclusion of women during the period of construction. So in summing up, if there's one resounding theme that comes through these narratives of Henry and Marianne Williams, the Paihia, later Pakaraka community, it is that despite cultural differences, philosophical differences, many Māori, they had become friends of many Māori had become their friends. Even those chiefs who remained outside the worshipping communion had become chiefs in many instances. And I think this is a frame, this frame of reciprocal agency and reciprocal love and hospitality that we need to re-establish as a frame for understanding these early stories. Kia ora koutou.